Just how beaten down are people in this country? Just how much more will people, not all people maybe, but too many people, perhaps most people, have inflicted upon them before saying enough? Is it a symptom of the madness of crowds? How much application of state power will people witness? Speak out against state policy and we'll put you in jail, while simultaneously setting free those who have committed actual real-world violence against peaceful citizens, seems to be the message now. Might it be that millions are in the grip of a condition akin to Stockholm Syndrome, when captives, victims of abusive relationships, develop sympathy or even downright affection for their captors and abusers? How else to explain why those who have systematically dismantled and cast aside the social contract between the people and the state, deliberately immiserated the middle class, heaped additional hardship on the poorest, demonised the indigenous population, strangled freedom of speech, continue to deploy propaganda and brainwashing to frighten and so coerce whole swathes of the population into a sustained state of fear and submission? How else to explain how those guilty of all of the above and more besides are still accepted as leaders and authority figures today? How many times will so many listen to Prime Minister Starmer and his party going back on their word, their promises before they were elected into office, over and over, before that natural majority says, simply and with feeling, no, no more of this? How many blatant breaches of trust in authority will people accept from freshly minted Prime Minister Keir Starmer's Labour Party before they demand his and their removal from office? Starmer warns that the autumn budget will be painful, but we all know who will feel that pain, more pain, and who won't. Over and over again, state hypocrisy runs unchecked. Do as I say and mind your own business. Starmer, like so many determined to call the shots, is insulated by wealth and status, by a pension protected by nothing less than an Act of Parliament. Why do the tax-paying citizens of this country, this admittedly divided and unhappy country, continue to tolerate the notion that while our infrastructure decays, while the cost of living soars, while the elderly are left in the cold, while the consequences of the last 4 years of deliberately ruinous policies in response to a pandemic that wasn't, policies that further enriched the rich and immiserated the rest, stripped freedom from the rest, while those consequences are shamelessly swept under the rug? Why do tax-paying, law-abiding citizens of this deliberately broken place, the home and hallowed soil of the ancestors, stand by while our billions of pounds, as yet unearned, are promised to Ukraine, a country thousands of miles away, promised to that country for 100 years if needs be, so that citizens there, those not already cold in the clay that is, might look forward to having their infrastructure rebuilt, their pensions paid, their bureaucrats' salaries paid, while Britain goes to hell in a handcart? Why is this accepted as though it was right or proper, far less wanted or approved by us? Under what hypnotic spell are millions of people sleepwalking into the cold and the dark, the inevitable consequences of yet more ruinous policies designed to enrich the rich, with subsidies for wind turbines that stand idle when the wind doesn't blow, that are routinely switched off when the wind does blow, making millions either way, for the smothering of entire landscapes and ecosystems with solar panels that do nothing in the hours of darkness, wind turbines and solar panels serving e-vehicles that are dependent for their creation upon the wholesale desecration of landscapes and ecosystems far away, the harvesting of critical earth metals dependent upon the labour of child slaves, all in the name of a so-called green agenda that seems to me to be only about greed. How much more of this deliberate destruction of the natural world, of traditions, communities, ways of life, will the millions tolerate from these ideologues determined only to impose one world government upon the billions? How much more? How much longer? That our noses are daily rubbed in just how free, just how untroubled by consequences our so-called leaders feel in saying one thing one day and then doing quite the opposite the next is bad enough. Unbearable too is how clear it has been made that seeing the wrong and calling it out troubles the wrongdoers not a jot. It's hard to avoid concluding it's intentional that we see it, learn the lesson that the powerful feel empowered now to do whatever they want in plain sight, secure in the knowledge it's their way or the highway. Are we arriving at the point where there is no truth and no lies, just what we're told today? Worst of all, though, is the looming imminent threat that one day soon it might be literally illegal to say this out loud. Free speech hangs by a thread, as inconvenient and as maligned as the truth itself. People are in jail now for words posted on social media, words deemed harmful at least in the eyes of those who have appointed themselves unquestioned arbiters of what is harmful and what is not. Given that thousands of criminals, violent criminals among them, are set free to make space for so-called armchair rioters, those convicted of posting what the authorities now describe as unlawful content on social media, a person might feel justified in questioning the direction in which we're being herded. Starmer's Labour were elected by a fraction of the electorate. In his own constituency, Starmer got just 18,884 votes, down from 36,641 in 2019, meaning his own personal vote was halved. The turnout in his constituency collapsed from 56,000 in 2019 to 36,000 this time. Corbyn got more personal votes than Starmer. Only a third of the popular vote was for Labour, the so-called Loveless landslide. All this can be summed up by saying 2/3 of the country didn't vote for him or his version of the Uniparty. It almost goes without saying that this latest red-shaded version of more of the same has inherited the damage inflicted upon society, the economy, the hearts and minds of the people from those just like them, indistinguishable from them really, who styled themselves blue, for all that matters. 4 years ago, people were silenced and vilified for telling the truth about the likely consequences of lockdown, the consequences of the all but mandated medical interventions. What was said then by the silenced, by the vilified, has been shown to have been the truth. But the telling of the truth have led to an altogether different election result in 2020. This truth is out there now and is making no material difference, no consequences, no charges, no impeachment. We can talk openly now. I can say that, in my opinion, the war in Ukraine was not the response to an unprovoked attack by Putin's Russia, that it was the consequence of 20 years and more of NATO mission creep advancing 1,000 miles across Europe right up to Russia's doorstep, despite signed treaties promising it would do no such thing. Action that, therefore, you could argue provoked Putin into action not to start a war but to finish one. All of that was said and suppressed and silenced, but it was true then and it's true now. And yet those responsible, with the blood of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and Russians on their hands, face no consequences whatever, while populations here, there and elsewhere continue to pay the price in pounds, euros, dollars and rubles, and also in yet more innocent blood. 4 years into this debacle, and the silencing and threatening and vilification are worse than ever. In Paris, the founder and CEO of the messaging app Telegram is detained in France, apparently awaiting charges, including, not to put too fine a point on it, refusal to let the intelligence community penetrate the encryption his customers depend upon for privacy. Other big tech platforms and the names associated with them are under attack as well, all over the world. Platforms hosting voices that told the truth all along. It turns out it's not misinformation and disinformation, the powerful fear, and would move heaven and earth to silence. It's what they call malinformation, which is more usefully described as the truth, the inconvenient truth. Here's the thing, if the millions are silent, and sadly they are, that's surely because it was the plan all along. Millions more are frightened, threatened, made aware of their own terrible vulnerability in the shadow of the powerful. For so many, it's reduced to just surviving, making ends meet. It was hard enough to speak up when the consequences were ridicule and vilification. It was hard enough when the consequences were the loss of family relationships, loss of friendships. Now the consequences of speaking up include loss of freedom itself, jail time for stating an opinion. It's harder than ever to keep heads up, but more important than ever. It's harder than ever to keep the faith, but more important than ever. We're told that he who remains silent is deemed to have granted his consent. I, for one, do not consent, not to any of this.